The Philippines is an archipelago located in the Pacific Ocean, made up of over 7,000 islands. Positioned on a subduction zone within the Ring of Fire, the region experiences significant seismic activity, including earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. This geological history has made the islands rich in minerals but also prone to natural disasters. Of the 7,000 islands, only around 1,000 are inhabited, most of which are small, covering about 1 square mile. The archipelago is divided into 3 main island groups: Luzon in the north, the Visayas in the central region, and Mindanao in the south. Luzon, the northernmost group, is the largest and most populous island in the Philippines, home to the capital city, Manila. Human presence on the islands dates back approximately 47,000 years, with earlier hominid species like Homo luzonensis appearing as early as 134,000 years ago. Evidence suggests Homo erectus inhabited the region as far back as 700,000 years ago. The ancestors of the modern Filipino population are believed to have migrated from Taiwan and other parts of Southeast Asia around 3000 BCE, belonging to the Austronesian cultural and linguistic group, which spans maritime Southeast Asia and reaches as far as Madagascar. Early settlements in the Philippines tended to be located near rivers, with isolated communities due to the region's geography. These communities often maintained social and political ties through intermarriage, kinship, and trade. By 2000 BCE, trade networks were well established, as seen in the discovery of Philippine jade artifacts, which traveled along the maritime Jade Road, a vast trade network that flourished for about 3,000 years. Philippine written history begins around 900 CE with the Laguna copperplate inscription, which records a debt cancellation. By this time, the islands were organized into socio-political units known as barangays, which were similar to city-states. These communities were typically led by a datu, and those in regions with stronger ties to the Indian subcontinent referred to their leaders as rajas. Society within the barangays was hierarchical, with the majanu, noble class, at the top, followed by freemen, the maharlika, and at the bottom, enslaved individuals, the alipin. Early Filipino belief systems were animistic, with a focus on spirits in nature, ancestor worship, and magic. Buddhism and Hinduism began to influence the islands before the 9th century, mainly through trade with the powerful Indianized states in the region, such as the Srivijaya and Majapahit empires. Islam first arrived in the Philippines in 1380, brought by the missionary Karim al-Maktoum. He established the first mosque in the Philippines in the Sulu archipelago, followed by the spread of Islam throughout the region. By the 15th century, the Sultanate of Sulu emerged as an influential Islamic state in the southern Philippines. Most of what is known about the Philippines' pre-colonial era comes from the records of neighboring countries, especially China. The Tonda Kingdom, located near modern Manila, was an important trading power, with Chinese records noting its significant role in Southeast Asian trade. By the early 16th century, the Tonda Kingdom declined, and the Luzon region asserted itself as a militaristic force, often engaged in wars across Southeast Asia, sometimes as mercenaries. The Sultanate of Sulu, established by settlers from the Visayas, became another significant state, known for its trade with other Southeast Asian regions, including Kampa, in modern Vietnam, and the Indonesian archipelago. Despite a brief conflict with Kampa, trade relations were restored. The first European encounter with the Philippines occurred in 1521 when the Spanish expedition led by Ferdinand Magellan stopped at Sulwan Island. Magellan's crew planted the Spanish flag, marking the Philippines for the first time on European maps. Magellan met with the local leader, Raja Humabon of Cebu, who converted to Catholicism and was baptized, along with many of his followers. However, Magellan's attempt to subdue resistance from the island of Mactan led to his death at the hands of Datu Lapu-Lapu, who rejected Spanish influence. After Magellan's death, the Spanish made no further attempts to colonize the Philippines until 1542, when a Spanish expedition led by Ruy López de Villalobos landed in Mindanao. However, weather conditions and lack of supplies forced the expedition to retreat. It wasn't until 1565, under the command of Miguel López de Legazpi, that the Spanish successfully established a colony in the Philippines, beginning with Cebu. Spanish colonial rule continued for over 300 years, during which they expanded their control over the archipelago. Manila became the capital of the Spanish East Indies, and the Spanish imposed their culture, religion, and governance on the indigenous population. Despite resistance, especially from Muslim communities in Mindanao, the Spanish maintained their control. Throughout the Spanish colonial period, there were uprisings, particularly in response to heavy taxation, forced labor, and religious imposition. One significant revolt was the 1587 plot by local dadists to overthrow Spanish rule, but the conspiracy was foiled, and the leaders were executed. In the 19th century, trade reforms and the growth of a Filipino middle class led to increasing calls for reform. Many Filipinos began to push for greater rights and representation within the Spanish Empire. By the late 1800s, revolutionary movements, most notably the Katipunan, began to gain momentum, eventually leading to the Philippine Revolution and the Declaration of Independence in 1898. This brief summary highlights key moments in Philippine history, from its early human settlement to the complex history of trade, religion, and resistance under Spanish colonial rule. It sets the stage for the nation's eventual struggle for independence. The Philippine Revolution began in August 1898, driven by the desire for independence from Spain. The rebels had success in rural areas but failed to capture Manila. Meanwhile, another conflict was unfolding between Spain and Cuba, which involved the United States and shifted the balance of power. Taking advantage of the situation, the U.S. gained a foothold in the Pacific, particularly after the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1, 1898. This battle marked the end of Spain's colonial rule over the Philippines, and the U.S. effectively took control. Under Emilio Aguinaldo's leadership, Philippine revolutionaries established a temporary government in June 1898. This government oversaw the drafting of a constitution, and on January 21, 1899, the First Philippine Republic was born, with Aguinaldo as its president. However, the U.S. refused to recognize the new republic, leading to a brief but intense conflict. The U.S. emerged victorious, and the Philippines became an unofficial American territory, a status it held until 1946. However, on January 4, the U.S. declared military rule over the entire archipelago, undermining the new government. In response, Aguinaldo reaffirmed the Philippines' independence and the right to defend itself, leading to the outbreak of war on February 4, 1899, with the U.S. assault on San Juan. The Filipinos, poorly equipped for conventional warfare, resorted to guerrilla tactics. The U.S. responded with counterinsurgency measures, including reconcentration camps designed to separate civilians from the guerrillas. Despite these harsh conditions, the resistance continued, and in December 1900, General Arthur MacArthur declared martial law. At the same time, the U.S. began setting up a new government, led by a commission headed by William Howard Taft, which worked to co-opt local leaders and reduce resistance. The capture of Aguinaldo in March 1901 marked a turning point. On April 19, 1901, Aguinaldo formally surrendered and swore allegiance to the United States, urging his people to lay down their arms. However, some local leaders, like Miguel Malvar and Vicente Lucban, continued to resist until 1902, with pockets of guerrilla warfare lasting until 1913. The Philippine-American War was far more costly than the Spanish-American War, resulting in at least 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths from disease, famine, and warfare. Both sides used brutal tactics, including the U.S. implementing a scorched earth policy and engaging in extreme methods to extract information from prisoners. After the war, the Philippines came under an insular government controlled by the U.S. This system aimed to guide the Philippines toward eventual independence. In 1916, the Philippine Autonomy Act, also known as the Jones Law, was enacted. This law replaced the Philippine Commission with an elected Senate and affirmed the U.S. policy of granting Philippine independence. However, it did not set a timeline for when this would occur. World War I paused any progress on independence, but after the war, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson was sympathetic, declaring in his 1921 farewell address that the Philippines was ready for independence, but his successors disagreed. This assessment was widely disputed, and it wasn't until 1933 that the U.S. established a timeline for independence, with the passage of the Philippine Independence Act of 1934. The act outlined the steps to form a Commonwealth, and set July 4, 1946, as the official date for full independence, following a 10-year transition period. The Philippine Commonwealth was established in 1935, and a new constitution was enacted. When Japan attacked the U.S. at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they also attacked the Philippines, pulling the country into World War II. The Philippine Army was integrated into the U.S. Army Forces Far East, under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, the son of a former military governor of the Philippines. To protect Manila, it was declared an open city, but it fell to the Japanese in January 1942. The Philippine government went into exile in Washington, D.C. The Japanese invasion, which caught American forces off guard, led to the infamous Bataan Death March, where approximately 600 Americans and 15,000 Filipinos died while being forced to march to prison camps. In response to the brutal occupation, a massive underground resistance emerged, with nearly 300,000 Filipinos participating in guerrilla activities. When the Americans returned in 1944, the resistance played a crucial role in providing intelligence. The liberation began with the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the largest naval battle in history. Despite initial confusion and setbacks, the Allies prevailed, and by 1945, Manila was retaken after intense street fighting. The war officially ended with Japan's surrender on September 2, 1945. By November, the Philippine Commonwealth celebrated its 10th anniversary, and plans for full independence were finalized. On July 4, 1946, the Republic of the Philippines was born. However, the country's post-war years were marked by economic struggles and internal conflict, with President Manuel Roxas, who had been elected in 1946, leading the nation through these challenges. Roxas's sudden death in 1948 led to the presidency of Opidio Quirino, who focused on social reforms and post-war recovery. Quirino's presidency was followed by the election of Ramon Magsaysay in 1953, who was seen as a champion of honest governance and national unity. Magsaysay's administration led the Philippines into the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, and supported UN forces in Korea. His presidency ended with his tragic death in a plane crash in 1957, and he was succeeded by Vice President Carlos P. Garcia. The Congress of the Philippines finally passed a bill banning the Philippine Communist Party. Despite significant opposition to the bill, President Garcia signed it into law as Republic Act No. 1700, also known as the Anti-Subversion Act, on June 19, 1957. The Garcia administration's pro-nationalist economic policies were met with disapproval from foreign countries, particularly the United States. The situation was further strained with the passage of the Filipino First policy, which worsened relations between the U.S. and the Philippines. Garcia exercised the Filipino First policy, for which he was known. This policy heavily favored Filipino businessmen over foreign investors. Despite the strain it caused in relations with the United States, the Filipino First policy was used strategically by the Philippines to encourage industrialization and empower Filipinos to take control of the nation's economy. Between 1949 and 1960, the country's manufacturing sector grew at an impressive rate of 29% annually. It became the fastest-growing sector of the economy, increasing its share from 8.1% in 1949 to 17.7% by 1960. Diosdado Macapagal Sr. was a Filipino lawyer, poet, and politician who served as the 9th President of the Philippines. During his presidency, Macapagal focused on combating corruption and fostering economic growth in the country. He introduced the first land reform law, placed the Philippine peso on the open market, and relaxed foreign exchange and import restrictions. Macapagal is also recognized for moving the observance of Philippine Independence Day from July 4 to June 12, a symbolic shift to honor the day President Emilio Aguinaldo declared independence from Spanish rule in 1898. In the 1965 presidential election, Macapagal sought re-election but was defeated by Ferdinand Marcos. Under Marcos, Macapagal was elected president of the 1970 Constitutional Convention, which eventually drafted the 1973 Constitution. However, the controversial process of ratification and amendments led him to later question the legitimacy of the new charter. Ferdinand Marcos, who became president in 1965, would be remembered for his long and controversial rule, which started with promises of reform but ended in dictatorship. Marcos used martial law to suppress opposition and extend his power, leading to widespread human rights violations and economic decline. In 1986, after the assassination of opposition leader Benigno Aquino Jr., a contested election between Marcos and Corazon Aquino led to mass protests and a peaceful revolution. Marcos was forced into exile, and Aquino became president, promising democratic reforms. Her administration was followed by Fidel Ramos, who helped bring peace to insurgent groups. In recent decades, the Philippines has faced challenges, including natural disasters, economic struggles, and political unrest. Joseph Ejercito Estrada served as the 13th president of the Philippines. During his presidency, he declared an all-out war against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, successfully capturing their headquarters and several camps. However, allegations of corruption led to an impeachment trial, and in 2001, Estrada was ousted during the second EDSA revolution. In 2007, he was convicted of plunder for embezzling $80 million from the government and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Later, he received a pardon from President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, his former vice president. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who served as the 14th president of the Philippines, was the country's first female vice president from 1998 to 2001 under Estrada. Following his ouster in 2001, she was sworn in as president by Chief Justice Hilario Davide Jr. on January 20, 2001. In October 2003, Arroyo announced her bid for the 2004 presidential elections, stating that she was driven by a higher cause to create positive change for society. With a master's degree and doctorate in economics, she focused on economic growth during her presidency. The Philippine economy grew at an average annual rate of 4.5% under her leadership, surpassing the economic performance of her three immediate predecessors, Corazon Aquino, 3.8%, Fidel Ramos, 3.7%, and Estrada, 3.7%. In 2007, the economy expanded at its fastest pace in 3 decades, with real GDP growth exceeding 7%. Arroyo received praise from former U.S. President Bill Clinton for her tough economic decisions. Benigno Aquino III, the 15th president of the Philippines, led the country through a period of substantial economic growth, with the nation achieving some of the highest growth rates in decades. This economic success earned the Philippines the title of a rising tiger economy. Aquino was also known for his assertive foreign policy, especially concerning the South China Sea dispute. His administration brought the Philippines versus China case before the Permanent Court of Arbitration to challenge China's territorial claims in the region. The court ruled in favor of the Philippines, affirming the country's claims. After leaving office, Aquino faced legal challenges related to the Mamasapano clash, a tragic incident during a mission to arrest high-ranking terrorists in a rural area. The operation resulted in the deaths of 44 members of the Special Action Force, SAF, a police unit trained for urban warfare. The clash also led to the deaths of 17 or 18 members of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, and the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, BIF, as well as 5 civilians. Aquino was also subject to legal scrutiny for his approval of a controversial budget project. Aquino passed away on June 24, 2021, at the age of 61, due to complications from diabetic kidney disease. Rodrigo Roa Duterte, a Filipino lawyer and politician, served as the 16th president of the Philippines. His presidency was marked by a strong domestic focus, particularly on combating the illegal drug trade through his controversial war on drugs. Duterte also prioritized fighting crime, tackling corruption, and intensifying efforts against terrorism and the communist insurgency. One of his major initiatives was a comprehensive infrastructure program aimed at reducing poverty, alleviating congestion in Metro Manila, and promoting economic growth. Launched on April 18, 2017, the Build program was a central element of Duterte's administration, focusing on ushering in the golden age of infrastructure. Notable projects under the program included the Subic-Clark Railway, the North-South Commuter Railway, the Metro Manila Subway, the expansion of Clark International Airport, the Mindanao Railway, and the Luzon Spine Expressway network. By April 2022, 12 of these projects had been completed, and 88 were in their advanced stages, set to be continued by the succeeding administration. Under the Build initiative, a total of 29,264 kilometers, 18,184 miles of roads, 5,950 bridges, 11,340 flood control projects, 222 evacuation centers, 150,149 classrooms, and 653 COVID-19 facilities were completed from June 2016 to July 2021. Duterte's presidential campaign prominently featured his stance on the Philippines' illegal drug problem, which he described as a threat to national security. Upon taking office, he initiated a nationwide crackdown on illegal drugs, resulting in over 1.37 million drug personalities surrendering to authorities within the first 15 months of his presidency. Among the surrendered individuals were 49,900 minors, 1.2 million males, and 87,000 females. Additionally, 46,443 of the surrendering individuals were students. Despite the scale of the crackdown, Duterte's vocal support for extrajudicial killings of drug users and criminals sparked significant controversy, particularly regarding human rights violations. His approach, while gaining political success, also led to widespread protests and condemnation, especially from human rights organizations and the international community. His successor, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known as Bongbong, took office in 2022 amid ongoing socio-economic issues, including the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout its history, the Philippines has faced internal and external challenges, but its strategic location and its role in regional and global politics continue to make it an important player on the world stage.